This is Emily Fessler, the Continuum of Care Director with Community Partnership of the Ozarks, and Adam Bodendeck, Senior Director of Homeless Services, also with Community Partnership of the Ozarks. We're with the Ozarks Alliance to End Homelessness, which serves Springfield, Greene, Christian, and Webster counties' continuums of care. Today, we'll be talking about the Crisis Cold Weather Shelter Initiative. The Crisis Cold Weather Shelters operate November 1st through March 31st when overnight temperatures drop below 32 degrees. Through Community Partnership of the Ozarks, Ozarks Alliance to End Homelessness, our Crisis Cold Weather Shelter Planning Committee works year-round to plan and prepare for shelter season. Facilitated by CPO, the Crisis Cold Weather Shelter Planning Committee meets during the off-season and weekly during the shelter season. The Crisis Cold Weather Shelters operate under the City of Springfield's declaration of an economic and housing calamity, which allows for individual agencies or churches that can meet building, safety, and health codes to establish facilities during the duration of this calamity to provide food and lodging to the unemployed and working poor who are without permanent residence or dwelling and shall not be considered shelters as defined by city zoning codes. This is done in partnership with the Ozarks Alliance and Homelessness and relevant City of Springfield departments, which includes shelters to be inspected and permitted through the city's fire department and building development services. All crisis cold weather shelters are coordinated and staffed directly by community volunteers. The Crisis Cold Weather Shelter Initiative is a testament to what our community can do when we have government, nonprofits, faith leaders, community advocates, and businesses all coming together to collaborate to support our community's most vulnerable. CPO is thankful and grateful to all of the partners and organizations and agencies that contribute to this work, particularly the dedicated volunteers who show up nightly throughout the entire 5-month winter period, and the Crisis Cold Weather Planning Committee who works tirelessly throughout the year that make this initiative truly possible. This is our purpose for why we do this work. It is not only to preserve life and prevent injury, but also to connect those that are vulnerable with longer-term supportive services, which include housing resources, medical care, case management. And this serves as a bridge to more permanent solutions as a part of our mainstream homeless services system. The crisis cold weather sheltering serves as a critical emergency response to protect individuals during extreme periods of winter weather. Our primary role is to provide a safe and warm place during temperatures that are dangerous and pose a significant risk of hypothermia, frostbite, and death. And so today we will learn more about risk factors for homelessness, trauma, trauma-informed care, de-escalation, and local resources before wrapping up with confidentiality information.
So when we talk about homelessness, it's always good to start by looking at the risk factors. So for this next section, we're going to talk about both individual and societal risk factors that contribute towards experiencing homelessness. And then we're also going to talk about interacting with someone who is experiencing homelessness and what trauma-informed care looks like in these situations, how to de-escalate situations, and just try to get a better understanding of trauma in general and how it plays a role and how it impacts those we serve. And then we'll also take a look at some local resources so that hopefully by the time we're all said and done, you feel a little better prepared in not only interacting and serving this population, but knowing how to connect with other supports and supportive services. When we talk about the risk factors associated with homelessness, we look both at factors that are societal and factors that are individual. When it comes to societal risk factors, we are looking at things like poverty, which unfortunately is prevalent in our area. And poverty is often compounded by related factors. So we tend to see large instances of generational poverty locally. There have been cases where we have been engaged and working with families for a period of years. And at one point, we were working with the grandparents and then subsequently working with the parents and then subsequently working with the children within a family. So generational poverty is a very difficult cycle to break. And it is definitely one of the most prevalent factors we see contributing towards housing instability and homelessness. Coupled with this, we see severe instances of underemployment. People are working, but they are working minimum wage jobs, and it's not uncommon for employers to keep hours at a certain threshold to where they don't meet full-time criteria. They don't have to pay benefits, and so we see a lot of people that they're working, but they are underemployed. They are not making enough to get ahead. They're certainly not making enough to build the stability necessary for housing. Education plays a role. Under education, we see that there are families, there are households that have received the equivalent of a high school education, and that's as far as they go, thus limiting their employment opportunities. So all of these things play roles. In addition to that, we have insufficient affordable housing. This is not a problem that is unique to Springfield, but it is a problem here in Springfield and in our surrounding counties. There was a study conducted recently by the city of Springfield, and they looked at the available housing stock. They looked at the need, especially when it comes to those who are low or extremely low income, and they found that there was nearly a 9,000 unit deficit when it came to meeting the need for this population. So that speaks a little bit to the scope of the affordable housing crisis. When we talk about permanent housing, we are talking about housing that is safe, it is decent, it is accessible, it is affordable. It has to be all of those things. And unfortunately, we do not have enough of that available. Other societal risk factors, discrimination is a real thing. Discrimination on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, on the basis of sexual identity, on the basis of religion. There are a whole host of factors, unfortunately, that play a role. And discrimination, these are things that we would like to think have been buried in the ash heap of history, but they unfortunately have not been. And so they are very, very real, and we are seeing them every single day. Um, Other factors, healthcare, you can also include in here childcare, all of these different things that are expensive. They are very expensive, and unfortunately, way too often, far too often, what we see are people having to make choices between paying for their housing or paying for their health care or child care or transportation costs. Um, these are all things that are very, very expensive. And when you're in a situation where you are looking at the impacts of generational poverty, you are looking at underemployment, you are looking at a lack of post-secondary education, you are looking at a lack of opportunities. When you combine all of these things with rising costs of everything else, you can see how it becomes very, very difficult. Few years back, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed some very fragile systems, and it laid bare the inadequacy of some of our safety nets that had been designed to address some of these societal risk factors, unfortunately. In addition to those societal risk factors, there are individual risk factors that contribute towards experiencing homelessness. This can include mental illness and substance abuse or a co-occurrence of both. It can also include physical health problems, again, looking at the cost of accessing healthcare. Victimization is not uncommon. We work very closely with some of our victim service providers, our domestic violence service providers locally. But that's not the only kind of victimization. And coupled with victimization often is trauma. Trauma is something we're going to spend a good deal of time talking about today because when it comes to um, situations that lead to experiencing homelessness, if you were to talk to 10 different individuals and you would ask, if you were to ask them what led them to being in the situation they're in today, you would very likely get 10 different answers. You would get answers ranging from the two-parent family that has been barely hanging on and underemployed for a period of time, and then something came along, disrupted the very tenuous balance they had, and subsequently resulted in housing being lost. Maybe a car broke down, there was a medical scare that required treatment, various things. Uh, and on the other end of the spectrum, you have those experiencing chronic homelessness long term, possibly the co-occurrence of mental illness, substance abuse disorder, a whole host of factors. But the one thing, the one commonality, when we conduct assessments, generally speaking, every single month, 98, 99% of those responding to the question regarding trauma indicate that there has been some traumatic incident, whether acute or chronic, there has been some traumatic incident or incidents that has significantly contributed to their current housing situation and episode of homelessness. That is the closest thing we see to a commonality amongst all populations, amongst everyone we serve, is the presence of trauma. Therefore, it is important to understand the impacts of trauma, how that comes into play, how that impacts everything. So we're definitely going to spend some time talking about that. Um, Additionally, and this sort of looks back to some of our societal issues, including generational poverty, a lack of personal support system. This is very common. We see where there is no safety net for a lot of individuals when it comes to a personal support system, whether it be through family, through friends, through other communities, that doesn't exist. And so that contributes also to increasing chances of experiencing homelessness. So trauma and trauma-informed care, acknowledging that trauma plays a huge role, acknowledging that trauma is very common for this population. What is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to understand that, is to know how to best engage when that is the baseline setting. It is to know how to offer care in a way that is meaningful and respectful and offers dignity and acknowledges the presence of trauma and gives that full weight and works within that environment, works appropriately within an environment that is fueled by trauma. And so that's trauma-informed care. Trauma-informed care is knowing and understanding how to engage, how to best engage in these situations in ways that are going to bring about beneficial results. When a person experiences an event or a series of events that is would be considered negative events, they may have an emotional response. That's called trauma. They may not. Trauma is different for everyone. Um, how it is ingrained, the impact that it has on somebody, this varies from person to person. People have varying levels of resiliency to trauma. And so just because somebody experiences a distressing event does not mean that they will experience trauma. Conversely, somebody who experiences what you or I may not consider a distressing event, but they do consider it a distressing event, they may experience trauma. Again, it is very individualized. It is based on the person and their perception, their experience, their resilience, their background, the way their brains are wired. All of these different factors come into play. And it's important to note that we do not get to determine if or when somebody should experience trauma or have a traumatic response. That is not something that we can say. That is not something that we can prescribe. Again, it is individualized. It is based on the person and their experiences. It is not something that somebody can come in and say, well, that's silly. You shouldn't be feeling this way. I want to make that very, very clear. It is not, there is no neat definition. There is no formula that determines if somebody is going to have a traumatic response or not. Now, there can be either acute or chronic trauma. Acute is an emotional response during and shortly after a single distressing event, after a single genesis point. That is acute trauma. Chronic is a long-term emotional response, and this is what we see in our population very frequently from prolonged or repeated distressing events over periods of weeks, months, or years. So oftentimes, when we are working with individuals experiencing homelessness, they are feeling the effects and displaying the effects of long-term chronic trauma. So what are some examples of traumatic events? Things that happen early on in life, when somebody is a child or is witness to events that happen to children, can be heavily traumatic. Child abuse, child neglect, um, various types of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, sexual. All of these things can serve as traumatic events. Um, Anything then from being bullied to um, surviving a natural disaster, being part of a natural disaster, to living in a climate of war, terrorism. These are obviously big things, but you see on this list, the important thing is that some of these things you may look at and consider big things, other things you may look at and consider small things, other things you may look at and say, wow, this would be significant for me versus I don't think this would be very significant for me. That doesn't matter. Again, no one size fits all approach. All of these different things, and this is obviously not an exhaustive, comprehensive list. These are just some examples. All of these things will impact people differently and can trigger uh, trauma differently across individuals. So when somebody has experienced a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, what does that look like? How does that manifest for them? Much like the inciting events can vary from person to person, how trauma manifests can likewise vary from person to person. The signs that they display, it's going to be different. Again, this list that you're looking at, these are some very common psychological or physical manifestations of trauma. This is not a comprehensive list. This is not exhaustive. However, these are some things that are commonly associated with the manifestation of trauma. Now, it's worth noting that some of the things on this list can also be symptomatic of something else entirely. This does not necessarily mean that anybody displaying any of these traits is clearly suffering from trauma. A lot of these things, there are a whole bunch of different reasons why somebody might displaying or might be acting in certain ways. Um, for example, a lot of times when I work with law enforcement and first responders on trauma and recognizing and understanding trauma, we talk about the fact that some of these behaviors could be indicative of trauma. They could be indicative of somebody currently using illegal substances. So you talk about startling easily or being very antsy or hypersensitive or whatever the case may be. And It may be that that's indicative of trauma. It may be something else entirely, all of these things. So this is why, um, as we go through this presentation and we talk, it becomes readily apparent that investing time into building relationships, into getting to know somebody is so crucial because that lays the foundation for being able to um, interpret behaviors and understand where they're coming from and why. Basic brain stuff. I am not a brain scientist. I don't pretend to be one. The brain is a beautiful, complicated thing. However, there are some basics um, that I understand. So we're going to talk about those. When it comes to basic brain stuff, our brains have different states that we may be in at any point in time. Our brain might be in survival mode, survival brain. This is commonly referred to as fight, flight, flee, or freeze. And the survival brain is strictly reactive. All it is capable of doing is reacting. It is not proactive. It cannot build beyond this reactive state. The emotional brain is where memories and feelings are involved. It gives meaning to um, to different events and it moves them into the memory section of the brain, what we remember. The emotional brain processes things that are good and processes things that are bad. The logical brain, this is the thinky part of the brain. This is the part that thinks and processes and plans and can absorb information and can learn. That's the logical brain. Now, trauma impacts the state of someone's brain. Traumatic incidences impact the state of someone's brain. Experiencing chronic trauma day in and day out severely impacts somebody's brain. It keeps the brain potentially in survival mode. It keeps it so that the brain is not capable of thinking clearly, of learning, of changing behaviors, because it is strictly reacting to external stimuli. It is strictly being used to determine protective mechanisms. Imagine your brain being in this state all the time, constantly being in a state of only being able to determine, should I fight? Should I flee? Should I freeze? What do I need to do for my own self-preservation and protection right now? It is not uncommon for those that we serve to be in this survival brain. When people ask me sometimes, why do people behave the way they do? Why do they make choices and do things that don't make sense? One reason for that is because their brain is trapped in this survival state. They are not processing rationally. They are not, quote unquote, thinking clearly. They are in a state of survival. And so acknowledging and understanding that this is brain chemistry. These are not things that can necessarily be consciously controlled. You can't choose to turn on or turn off a part of your brain. You can't forcefully will into existence a transition from one state to another. It's based on what you are experiencing, how you are processing it, if you are safe, if you feel connected, all of these things play a role in how your brain is operating at any given point in time. So, understanding that being in this mode of survival brain is very common. You'll see how that will impact how we engage with individuals and how individuals engage with us. De-escalation is a series of techniques used to reduce the intensity of a crisis situation. When people are manifesting signs of trauma, when they are in a survival brain state, when they are potentially experiencing a mental health crisis in conjunction with all of this, it is not uncommon for situations to escalate into potentially crisis situations. It is not uncommon for behaviors to amp up, for volumes to increase, for behavior that appears to be irrational to take center stage. And so what we do is we look at techniques that can be used to reduce the intensity of a crisis, to bring the volume back down, to calm things down, to certainly not make things worse, to not aggravate, or to not um, increase the potential for a crisis situation to go from bad to worse. Instead, we try to practice very specific techniques and behaviors to de-escalate, to bring things down. This serves a few different purposes. It benefits the escalated individual when somebody is in the midst of a um, traumatic crisis and they feel like they are spiraling out of control. Practicing de-escalation techniques can help reduce that tension. It can help them regain control. It can help them get to a position where the brain begins to shift from strictly survival mode to being able to process emotions and ultimately make logical decisions. So it enables people to better cope with their situation and better interact and engage with those around them. So when we talk about de-escalation, what are we hoping to accomplish? What are the goals, like we just said? Um, and through this, these are a few key things when it comes to de-escalation to remember. One, safety is always the number one priority. Your safety, the safety of those around you, the safety of the guests you're serving, the safety of the individual. This is the number one priority more than anything else. It is to ensure a safe environment. Um, but some other goals of de-escalation, we want to be able to enhance not only our current skills, but also the individual skills. We want to model behaviors that can help enhance their current skill set. We want to help offer them flexible sets of options to make decisions and to avoid feeling out of control. We want to pursue multiple approaches towards reaching those solutions. It's nice to have choices. It's nice to have options. I remember when my kids were young, we would do this a lot. We would give them choices. We would give them options of things to do. And it was a very carefully curated list, right? We knew that whatever was chosen would lead to the desired outcome, but we gave them the choice. We created multiple pathways, multiple approaches for them to get there. Ultimately, the goal of de-escalation is to improve outcomes. So we want to see more positive interactions than negative. We want to see a reduction in the severity of negative episodes, and de-escalation is one of the key tools in helping to improve those outcomes when it comes to how we interact and how others interact. So before we talk about how to de-escalate a situation, let's look at what can escalate a situation. When you have somebody who is agitated, who is understandably frustrated, who is mad at the world, and it is beginning to come out of them, again, remembering that oftentimes there are things like trauma, there are things like mental illness, there are things that exacerbate and make it so that the environment is rife for an explosion, an emotional explosion. Um, and you've got somebody who is getting to that point. What are some things that will quickly escalate that situation? The environment plays a key role. Who's in the room? Is it somewhere that you feel safe? Are these people you feel safe with, or are these people that you feel threatened by? Are these people that you get along with, or are these people that you feel have an adversarial relationship? That will play a role. What is the temperature? Is it comfortable? Is the room comfortable? What is the location? Is it a place where you feel comfortable? Is it a place where you feel safe versus a place where you feel on edge? These all are factors. Are there weapons around? Is it a dangerous situation? All of these environmental factors can play a role in escalating somebody's behavior and in escalating a situation. Behaviors, likewise. How are people interacting with you? If I'm in the midst of a crisis and I can feel that it's things are moving out of my control, if I'm surrounded by people and I view them, whether logically or not, if my brain processes that people are a threat to me, and it could be based on the look on their face, it could be their expression, how they're standing, where they're standing. If I'm feeling threatened, then my behavior is going to escalate. Um, what's going on in my brain? Again, let's remember, I am not thinking logically right now. And it's not because I don't want to, but it's because my brain is not capable. It is in a different state. It is not letting me make logical choices and decisions, no matter how hard I may want to. I may have delusions. I may have paranoia. I may have irrational thoughts that are impacting my behavior. Um, when it comes to individuals experiencing unsheltered homelessness, there are lots of times throughout any given day where, rational or not, they feel threatened. And so they carry that with them into new environments. Maybe it was one bad experience that has taken root and taken hold and just won't shake free, and that is impacting their behavior because they are carrying that experience into every environment that they where they go, into every interaction that they have. um, Emotions, not just thoughts, not just the logical or illogical piece, but the emotions. Am I angry? Am I scared? Am I sad? Have I been carrying these emotions with me for a long time? These are things that will impact how I behave in a situation and will likely cause that behavior to escalate. So how do we combat that? How do we counteract that? How do we help de-escalate? What does it look like to engage with somebody in a way that is going to hopefully increase the chances for a positive outcome by bringing things that are up here down here? These are some techniques, some tips and tricks. Maintaining a calm demeanor and voice. Raising your voice does not help. It does not assert authority. What it does is it makes you a threat. It makes you adversarial. So keeping it calm, your demeanor, your voice, your overall approach, staying calm is going to be one of the best things you can do. Problem solving with somebody who's in the midst of a crisis and letting them drive, not presuming that you know the solution, working collaboratively, working with them to solve the problem, getting their input. What can we do to help right now? What would help this situation? What would benefit you in this moment? And let's see what we can accomplish together. Let's see what we can do on that front. Being empathetic, understanding, I understand where you're coming from, offering choices. Again, this gets back to what I mentioned earlier. I'm not giving you a directive. I'm not telling you one thing. I'm not putting you in a box. I am offering you choices. I am empowering you to make decisions that impact your situation. Asking open-ended questions, allowing a dialogue to build. When you ask open questions, you create the opportunity for a conversation to continue. You remove um, those easy off ramps where people can shut it down. When you ask open-ended questions that keep things going, you are building rapport and you are keeping things moving forward and progressing. Being patient, taking time, giving someone time to think and process. This can be time consuming, but it's worthwhile. But taking the time, not rushing. And I know that can be hard. I know it can be difficult. And there's times where it is extremely difficult because there's 100 other things going on, vying for your attention, places you need to be, things you need to be doing. But as much as you possibly can, taking time, giving someone time to think and process is absolutely critical. Decreasing the tension with relaxation. This is a technique. I do this a lot myself. There are times where I can feel things getting amped up. I can feel it starting to physically manifest. I can feel it in my brain. I can feel it in my heart. Stopping, taking some deep breaths, willing my body to relax just a little bit. And these are techniques not only that you can use with yourself, but you can use with others who are in the process of escalating. Again, the approach is crucial though. You know what? I feel like things are kind of starting to spiral. Things are really starting to amp up a little bit. Will you do me a favor? Can we stop for a second? Can we take a couple of deep breaths? Can we center ourselves and go from there? Uh, Tends to once people stop and you start giving conscious attention to your behaviors, it gives an opportunity at least to start reflecting a little bit and potentially exerting some control over those behaviors. Some other techniques, some important overlying techniques. Ignore, not the person, ignore challenges. A lot of times these incidents will manifest as challenging questions, challenging behaviors, challenging your authority, challenging your role, challenging the overall system, challenging anything possible. Um, Ignore that. Don't take the bait and don't take it personally and don't try to satisfy challenging questions because you will not be able to. Um, I don't mean to demean anyone by any stretch, but this becomes almost akin to arguing with a headstrong toddler. There is nothing you can say that is going to satisfy, that is going to, oh, okay, cool. It's just going to progress. So ignore these questions. There's no winning when you are being challenged like this. Allow for venting, allow for frustration, allow somebody to get out what's irking them and what's contributing towards this incident. That's okay. Don't correct them. Don't try to invalidate their feelings. Let them get it out. Allow the venting. Avoid these imperatives, these directives, saying you have to. Here's what you have to do. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you must do. When I'm amped up and I'm feeling out of control already with my environment, with the situation, with my life in general, the last thing I want is for somebody to tell me what I have to do. Because what that communicates to me is that you know better than I do. And I don't think that's the case. My brain won't let me think that's the case, that you know better than I do for my situation. So do not give orders. However, set limits, explain expectations. I think it's very important to say that de-escalation doesn't mean letting somebody just do whatever they want. and continue down a path. It's the opposite, right? We're trying to reduce the severity of the situation. So people crave structure. This is been studied. This gets into brain stuff too, but people like structure. We like structured environment. We like clear expectations. We thrive in that environment. So setting limits, I understand that you're really upset right now, but the way you're acting towards me is not acceptable. And so let's try something different. Or I understand where you're coming from. I understand that this has upset you. I get it, but there are ways we can address this and there are ways that we can't. So we need to focus on the ways that we can and being very clear in explaining what your expectations are and what you're trying to accomplish. Be clear, use simple language. Rule of five, no more than 5 words in a sentence, 5 letters in a word. Obviously, you don't have to count in your head 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as you're doing this, but just understanding as a general rule of thumb, being straightforward, being clear. This isn't an opportunity for you to impose upon someone how smart you are and what a large, robust vocabulary you have. This is a time for simple, clear communication. And for not only how you communicate, how you speak, but how you hear, how you listen, reflective, active listening. Am I hearing this correctly? So, what I'm hearing from you, giving them the opportunity to clarify in case anything is unclear, but reflecting, showing that you are engaged in this process with them is a clear de-escalation technique. So being very active in how you're listening. Some other tips: identify yourself, explain why you are there. Um, otherwise, everything is compounded by stranger danger. If I don't know you, if I don't know why we're interacting, I'm going to worry that maybe you don't have my best interest at heart, and so I may be antagonistic. But if you identify yourself, if I know who you are, if I know why we're involved, then that's going to, at some level, right off the bat, put me at ease a little bit. Maintain good eye contact. This is not the threatening stare. It's not a staring contest. I'm not staring you down, but I'm maintaining good eye contact. I am showing you, consciously, subconsciously, that I am engaged in this process with you. I'm speaking slowly. I am being fairly deliberate in my words and my tone of voice. Again, it goes back to the very first thing, maintaining a calm demeanor. If things start going fast, then everything kind of starts feeling fast and then it starts feeling frantic and then you start amping up. But if we can slow things down, then it's going to feel um, much more. I'm going to feel calmer. I'm going to feel better able to process what's happening. So slowing down, being patient, again, taking your time, remembering that environment can escalate. Is there a quiet space? Is it safe to find a quiet space where we can eliminate distractions and we can process through this and we can work this out and we can talk to each other? I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to not overcrowd you because, again, as soon as I start encroaching on your personal space, I feel like a threat. Whether I am or not, whether I am a threat to you or not, remember, if I'm coming from a point where I've had negative experiences and people have been a threat and I'm constantly on guard against people threatening me or my safety, then I'm going to interpret your encroaching on my personal space as a threat. And when that happens, then the brain, again, I'm in survival brain mode. I'm thinking, do I fight? Do I fight? Do I freeze? What do I do? The last thing we want is somebody to make that snap to, okay, I'm going to fight. right? That's not what we want. That's definitely what we want to avoid. So I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to respect your personal space. I'm going to stay back. I'm going to be very clear about what I'm doing. If I'm going to start moving around, I'm going to let you know. Again, I'm being very clear and deliberate in how I act and what I do. Um, so if I'm going to get up, if I'm going to do something, it is, I'm going to get up now and I'm going to move around a little bit if that's okay. I'm gonna be very clear though. I'm gonna let you know. Again, choices whenever possible. I want to give you autonomy. I want to give you control. I want to give you choices in how things progress, um, in how we continue to interact and what the next steps are. So what do you think? What do you think would be beneficial right now? I'm asking, um, what do you feel like you need? What would help this situation? What can I do for you in this moment that would help? So I'm taking the time not only to offer those and ask that, but to give choices. And again, I'm going to keep my language short. I'm going to um, not try to, again, overwhelm with my loquaciousness and show off what a big brain I have and how many big words I know. Uh, there may be times where that's appropriate outside of these situations, sure, but not now. This is not the time for that. I think we've hit on most of these, but some more tips, asking open-ended questions, keeping that dialogue going, building the rapport, responding to delusions by talking about feelings rather than what they're saying. It is not uncommon for people to experience delusions, things that they think, things that they see. Um, And we're not going to invalidate those feelings. We are not going to say, well, that's not true at all, because that doesn't make sense. We're at least going to acknowledge, I understand you. So I understand that you think this, and I would imagine this makes you feel, etc. So we're going to focus on the feelings when it comes to some of these things that clearly, if our brain were operating logically, we would know not to be true. Um, so we're going to address the feelings. We're not necessarily going to validate. We're not going to say, yes, you're right. The clearly the entire police force has been taken over by aliens and they are surveilling what you're doing. We're not going to give credence, but we're also going to say, of course, that's not true. That's crazy. We're not going to dismiss. We're not going to completely um, um, take away any credence to what somebody is saying in that regard. We're not going to dismiss it or belittle. Let's focus on the feelings. We're going to treat people kindly. We're going to treat them with respect. This is the number one thing. If there is one tip, one trick, one anything, it is regardless of the situation, no matter what, treat people kindly, treat them with respect. I like to take this a step further and say it becomes even more important when that's not what's being modeled back at you. When somebody is not treating you kindly or not treating you with respect, I think that's when it becomes even more important to double down and make sure that we are treating people that way. Um, Avoid overwhelming somebody in a crisis situation, even when people mean well, even when people mean well. When somebody is in the midst of a crisis and all of a sudden they're surrounded by six, seven, eight, however many people, remember, if your brain is not thinking logically, you are in a survival state right now. Suddenly there's all these people around. How is that going to be interpreted? It's not going to be interpreted as helpful. It's going to be interpreted as threatening. Um, and really, I think a lot of times when I see situations like this, where again, people mean well, they want to get involved and they want to help. I think it's worth stopping and asking, though, do you serve a purpose right now? Is there something that you're doing or contributing? Do you need to be in the thick of this right now? And if the answer is no, which chances are the answer is probably no, then back off. Just back off for a little bit. Okay. Hopefully, the striking redness of this makes it very clear these are things we don't want to do. These are These are ways that if you want to really, really escalate a situation, by all means, this is going to take you from 0 to 20 to 180 real fast. So these are things we don't want to do. Don't be misleading. Don't be decisive, either of those. So misleading, don't make promises that you can't keep. Okay. Or don't even give the impression that you have a solution when you don't. Um, don't be decisive. Don't remove the opportunity for that open-ended dialogue or discussion. Again, maintain eye contact, good. Staring the person down, bad. Don't challenge, don't confront. You are not going to cow someone into submission when they are in this state. Um, don't tease, don't belittle, don't be sarcastic. Um, Way too often, I think sarcasm is my default baseline setting. So in situations like this, I have to remember that is not the place um, for being sarcastic, for making jokes, making light of the situation. Don't whisper, don't joke, don't laugh, don't make somebody feel less than, because when you feel that way, then you're going to react. So we want to, again, we're treating people kindly and with respect. Don't threaten. I've seen this before. You keep this up and they're going to lock you up. You keep this up, you know what? I'm calling the hospital and they're going to lock you up and throw away the key. No. No. That is not the right approach. Um, don't forget that when somebody is having an incident, when things are escalating, there's a reason for it. There are all sorts of compounded reasons for it. Don't forget that somebody in this situation likely feels very out of control, and as a result, they are afraid, they are feeling pain. It could be physical, it could be emotional, it could be any type of pain, and they've been feeling, and it's compounded and brought them to this point. Don't forget that. Don't look at somebody as your adversary when you are trying to de-escalate a situation. The goal is you're trying to accomplish this together. And so remembering that this is a partner, not an adversary, not an enemy. Um, we talked about personal space. Don't get up into somebody's face. Don't invade their personal space. Posture is actually very important too. If you're standing like arms crossed and you're very closed off, or you're leaning over them, posture can be very threatening. That's part of environment that can exacerbate a situation. So make sure we're not violating personal space. And don't argue. When a person is experiencing delusions or hallucinations, there's no point. There is nothing that will come from arguing. You cannot argue somebody into not seeing something or believing something that they believe. If if they believe that every other person in that room is part of a gang that is looking to abduct and exploit children. This is a real situation we've had before where somebody thought that. Me telling them, no, they're not. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What are you even talking about? That's crazy. That's not the way to make progress on addressing the beliefs, thoughts, and behaviors. You can't argue with somebody rationally when their brain is not in a rational, logical state of mind. Okay. So you are involved in a situation, it has escalated, you have done everything that you can to de-escalate, but you need some additional support. Or you just want to make sure that you feel comfortable knowing what some of the local behavioral health resources are so that you know in a crisis situation what resources you have at your disposal. One is obviously the police. So if you have an emergency situation or you need to check on the well-being of someone, 911 is a perfectly appropriate means for doing that. Now, criminal action versus well-being. Just because you're calling 911 doesn't necessarily mean that it is because there is a criminal action taking place. Again, it could be to check on somebody's well-being. It could be to engage with a mental health professional. When you call 911, if it is due to a mental health crisis, a well-being check, something along those lines, you can request a CIT trained officer. These are officers who have gone through um, training to really have a better understanding of serving as a mental health responder and what it looks like in that capacity as opposed to dealing with criminal action. So they have received training in trauma and trauma informed care. And they have spoken with lived experience groups and they have a sense of what it is when we see the intersection of mental health and law enforcement. And so you can request CIT trained officers, and you can also request a mental health co-responder locally within the city of Springfield, embedded within the Springfield Police Department through Borough Behavioral Health. There are mental health co-responders that partner with the police because ultimately the goal is to um, bring the right tool to the right situation, right? You think about it, expecting police to be well versed and well trained in addressing mental health crises and responses, that may not exactly be appropriate, right? I think it's more appropriate the police be focused on police work and looking at the criminal side of things. So you can request co-responders who can come alongside with the police and eventually take over the situation and help with the de-escalation in the next steps. Now, if you have a non-emergency situation, I always recommend being aware of and knowing who your PAR officer is. So Springfield Police Department has a program called PAR. It is Police Area Representatives. They are officers that are assigned to certain geographical regions, and you can find these on the City of Springfield's website, who the PAR officer is for any particular area. Um, when it comes to neighborhood issues, when it comes to minor things, when it comes to having a police presence outside of emergency situations, knowing your PAR officer is a very valuable resource. Another very important resource, 988, which is the crisis and suicide line. There's a lot of times where we are working with individuals and we are offering this as a resource and they're taking us up on it. And then it's a matter of finding a quiet environment, finding a place where they can make this call to 988, to the crisis and suicide line. They can connect, and there are trained professionals then who are able to address issues, um, work on further de-escalation techniques and get involved at that level, and then provide follow-up as necessary. So maybe then they dispatch a mental health co-responder to come provide additional resources or services. But 988 is an amazing resource, and so I encourage everyone to take advantage of that when the situation warrants. So we mentioned PAR officers. These are your local PAR officers. There is the map that shows which area is served by which officer and who you can reach out um, to make introductions and to know. Again, this page is available along with the zone map on the City of Springfield website.
Thank you, Adam. So now we will talk just a little bit about confidentiality. And so, really, when we're talking about confidentiality, the guiding principle really is to respect the dignity of the people who are experiencing homelessness. These are individuals who are often forced to live in the public sphere and face a lot of scrutiny and a lot of times are stigmatized by society. So, inappropriate disclosure of personal information can only reinforce that stigma and provide social harm. There are sometimes certain vulnerable individuals may require heightened protection of their information. So, a good example of this includes survivors of domestic violence or individuals who have been human trafficked, as well as individuals who have mental health or substance use disorders. In the professional world, you may be familiar with informed consent. In homeless services, we have to provide obtain written informed consent from clients before we can share their personal identifying information. For the purposes of crisis cold weather shelter, there is not a written informed consent. But when they are at the shelters, there is that idea of informed consent and privacy that comes along with that shelter. This is going to be very clear about, sharing what information with who and for what purposes. And so really when you're looking at what can you share and when can you report things, it's important to consult with the shelter coordinator of the individual shelter that you are serving at. This is particularly important when an individual's status could expose them to harm, especially if it's sensitive information that should not be shared with law enforcement or other individuals without their explicit consent. So it is always important to ask before you share any information to go to your shelter coordinator for more specifics about what information is being requested, why it's being requested, and if you're able to provide that information. Individuals coming into the shelter are expecting an element of confidentiality and privacy when in that shelter, and it is key for us to respect that information. However, if you are concerned for an individual's safety or their well-being, that is an opportunity where, as Adam provided local resources, that you could then report or share those concerns with the information that you have. When in doubt, don't share. Unless it is for a health or safety reason or the well-being of an individual or of another individual, it is best not to share information, particularly when you are talking with individuals at these shelters. You are going to learn things about their lives, about their stories, and it's important that we don't dishonor that information that they are sharing with you by sharing that outside of that environment. You will learn a lot of things about a lot of individuals that you are going to be working with, and it is key that when in doubt, you just don't share that information unless it is for a safety reason. If you have any questions about the content in this training, you are welcome to reach out to Adam or I. Our contact information is here. We are happy to share more information with you about any questions that you may have regarding the content of this training or about the Crisis Cold Weather Shelter program. Thank you again for being interested in volunteering for the Crisis Cold Weather Shelters. We appreciate it greatly. It is very key to making sure these individuals have a safe, warm place to go. And thank you so much. Please reach out to your shelter coordinator for any additional trainings that may need to be required. Thank you.